Okay, so today we're going to look at Chapter 2.8, Photography. Where I'd like to start is actually looking at the history of photography. In this image, you'll be able to see this idea of the really basic concept of recording an image. There's a large room, and I mean this was what several artists would do. They have a small opening in the wall, and the light from outside that wall, all of the imagery that you see, that like the tree, the statue, because it's immediately on the other side of that wall, it would be visible through that opening where the light is entering into the dark room, but the image would be upside down. The artist could trace this and then use the tracing for a painting. So eventually they end up moving away from having a room and instead having a large box. And they put a mirror inside of it so it would create the image right side up, and the artist would still trace it. And here are some examples of artists that still, even though we don't have to use camera obscura, they just want to. Okay, so next is the cyanotype. It's a photographic process that uses light-sensitive iron salts that oxides and produces a brilliant blue color where the light is penetrating and remains white where the light is blocked out. And so here's just a little step-by-step. So basically you'd have the thicker paper. You would have a chemical solution that has the light-sensitive iron salts that will be oxiding in the light. So you take a brush, you paint it onto the paper, you let it dry, then you position your objects on top of the paper, then you expose it to the sunlight, and then it creates basically an outline. And then once that paper's been submerged into water and cleaned, then your cyanotype comes out. Daguerreotypes are actually prior to cyanotypes, but it was the first concept where the artist is not tracing, and instead the image is chemically being reproduced. And so a photographer and chemist created this together. The exposure time was really slow, and it was mounted onto metal at first, a metal plate that was inserted into the wooden box. And since the exposure was so slow, it wouldn't pick up motion. So if you look at that photograph, you could see in the street, it just looks empty, but it would have been really well populated. But right here, there's a man getting his shoes shined. So that just lets us know he was standing still enough and long enough to be captured by the film. Here's a daguerreotype on the left. That's what it would look like. It's metal. With technology today, there could be an X-ray scan that can detect the mercury elements on it and actually print out an image of that photograph. So it's really impressive what we're able to do. But it's an 8-hour long drill. Now we're going to look at darkroom photography. And this is just a picture of a studio. I'm going to step back, talk about this, and then go back. If you're not familiar with what a positive and a negative is, well, first, what's in the image, they're films. So we were looking at metal, and then there's a development from metal, and the same process, but instead of metal, they put it on paper, like a cardboard type paper. And now we go into film, which is what I kind of grew up around. The positive film, which is the one on the left, you can see it's colorful. The lights are light and the darks are darks. But the negative of that is the reverse of it. So the darks are light and the lights are darks. So let's go back up. So if you look, there's this machine, and there's a variety of these. They don't, they do similar, but there are some that that just even more modern than the one in this image. But it basically, you put the film inside the enlarger, and it works like a projector, and it projects that image onto a light-sensitive paper or film, depending on what you're wanting it to develop on. But usually it's a film, paper that we would, you could, I guess if you have digital prints, you might go and get them printed out at like your local Walmart. So you'd have that kind of paper, and instead you're the one doing this, and you can control the amount of time that it's exposed and the darkness, the riches of those contrast. And then afterwards, you have the reverse of that negative, which means the lights are lights and the darks are darks in the final image that's being produced. And then they soak it in water and let it air dry. Here's just an image of the positive on the left and that negative that was used to create the positive. Now, a lot of people will wonder, why is it that you can have a red light bulb with the film? Doesn't that mess up the film when it's exposed to it since it's light sensitive? The negatives, you can have a red light or an amber light and it will not damage the image on the film. But if it's the film positive with the color, it is sensitive to all spectrums of light. That means like cool light and warm light. So you would have to have a completely dark room. So that's why typically you'd see those films insert into a machine and the machine would process it. Let's look at different themes within photography. We've got portraiture. In this portraiture, there's the concept of soft focus where the edges are blurred and the center is in focus and is therefore the focal point. Landscape. Still life is the arrangement of objects and their intentional placement for that image, that photograph. Photojournalism, usually tell a news story. A lot of them are historical. Here's one by Lewis Hine. He would go in, he'd get permission to go into factories and mills and coal mines where young children were working, and he would document what their working environment was. Like you could see the little girl is so small compared to the machinery. And he actually used these photographs to show how dangerous it was for them to work and that they needed to not be doing this. And this actually led to the establishment of laws that would keep children in schools as opposed to working. Now there's the debate of photography, is it really art? At first, there were art critics that were pretty much at odds with that. And they would feel as though they had to defend themselves. One of those photographers was Alfred Stieglitz. He uses the idea of the modern paintings at his time were really concentrating on the elements of art that we learned about in part 1 and how they're arranged. So here he has a really bright light gray diagonal thrust into space, overlapping another dark gray line, and then you've got the roundness of the white hat, these kind of dark shadowy spaces. So he was looking at this not so much about the people and who they are or what they're doing, but more of the composition. And just to kind of further that, so here's the painting from his, that would have been contemporary to him at the time. And you can see how they're breaking up space. They're simplifying the buildings and the structures to more geometric shapes. And in this photograph, you can see that he is, just like in before, he's considering like the diagonals, the lights, the darks. And so he was defending that, it's not the camera that decides that composition, but the photographer. So they are an artist. So let's look at digital photography. I really thought this was an interesting artist. Her name is, I think it's Wendy McMurdo. She's from Scotland. I think Scotland or London, England. But she has a really great, there's a video interview that it was really neat to watch. She grew up with the digital photography as it developed, and she just really played around with it and pushed it. So in this image, she is at a school, and she decided to take images and combine them to make this almost like a mirror. It's reflecting that part of the staircase and the little entryway to the school, and it has a cast shadow. And all of this she was able to do digitally. And if you look closely at this photograph, the girl has two reflections. And she wrote this because, and I have the quote at the bottom, it says, "Today if a child wants to learn about something, they don't naturally go to a museum. They go online." And so she liked this idea of capturing children going to a museum and how things are different. It was just allowing her to process her childhood versus what maybe children do today. And then this is really popular. It's called surrealism in photography. So before digital, there was a period of surreal photography. This looks like it was probably exposed onto paper. And the idea is that the woman, her back is maybe, I don't know, some sort of bass, I don't know, violin, some sort of musical instrument. And then if you look over here to the right, there's uh, a surfer, but instead of waves, there's clouds. And he's a really interesting digital photographer if you want to look him up. He's pretty young, Justin Peters, and he has a lot of beautiful surreal landscapes that he takes different photographs, and through Photoshop he combines them together, and it really is a true art form. Okay, and that's going to conclude us.